Malik wiped his hands on the rag he kept in the passenger seat, the scent of motor oil still clinging to his skin from a long day's work. His son Jeremiah was waiting at home, and tonight was special. Pancakes for dinner, just the way the boy loved them. He glanced at the grocery bags in the back seat and smiled. The low hum of the radio filled the truck cab as he drove through town, past the same streets he'd known since childhood. But the ease in his chest vanished when he saw the red and blue lights flash in his rearview mirror. His fingers tightened on the steering wheel. Not here. Not now. He pulled over, rolling the window down before the officer even reached him. Boots crunched on the asphalt. License and registration. The voice was cold, familiar. Malik exhaled slowly, reaching into the glove compartment with steady hands. "Evening, officer." Ray Thompson smirked down at him, his hand resting lazily on his holster. "Evening. What brings you to this part of town?" Malik handed over his license. "Heading home. Just picked up some groceries." Thompson chuckled, shaking his head. "You always have a story, don't you?" He glanced at the bags in the back seat, then leaned in, his breath thick with arrogance. "See, fellas like you. You think you can just go anywhere you please." Malik stayed quiet. He knew better than to take the bait. A small group of pedestrians had stopped on the sidewalk, their gazes wary. A woman pulled out her phone, recording, Thompson noticed. His smirk deepened. "You ever been arrested, Malik?" "You know I haven't." "That's so?" Thompson paced slowly, tapping the side of the truck. "See, thing is, we've had some break-ins around. Here. And you look a little out of place." Malik clenched his jaw. "I'm a mechanic. I work just 3 streets over." Thompson ignored him. He nodded toward the open glove compartment. "Mind if I take a look?" Malik hesitated, his stomach coiled. He knew how this worked. If he refused, it'd be obstruction. If he agreed, it wouldn't matter anyway. "Go ahead," he said through clenched teeth. Thompson reached in, and for the first time Malik saw it happen. The flick of the wrist, the way his fingers moved with practiced ease. The small plastic bag that hadn't been there before was suddenly nestled between the registration papers. Malik's breath left him in a sharp gust. Well. Thompson's voice rang out loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. He pulled the bag into view, holding it between his fingers like a prize. "Would you look at that?" A murmur rippled through the onlookers. The woman recording stepped closer. "That's not mine," Malik said, his voice steady but lined with fire. Thompson's grin widened. "Yeah? Guess we'll let the evidence speak for itself." Handcuffs clicked open. Malik didn't resist. Resisting would mean his son losing a father forever. As the cold steel locked around his wrists, his gaze flickered to the sidewalk. Jeremiah stood there. Miss Eleanor's hand gripped his shoulder, but the boy's face, his small, tear-streaked face, was locked on him. "Daddy?" His voice was barely a whisper. Malik felt something inside him break. Thompson yanked him toward the squad car, the officers, smug laughter cutting through the night. But the eyes of the crowd burned into him. The phone cameras didn't waver. Thompson thought this was just another day, another problem taken care of. What he didn't realize was that he had just signed his own downfall. The metal door clanged shut behind Malik, sealing him inside the dimly lit holding cell. The cold from the steel bench seeped into his bones as he sat down, his hands still aching from the too tight cuffs. His chest rose and fell in slow, measured breaths. He had to stay calm. He had to think. A guard walked past without so much as a glance, his keys jingling at his side. "Hey," Malik called out, his voice steady. "I need to make a call." The guard didn't stop. Malik exhaled sharply and leaned his head back against the cinder block wall. He closed his eyes, but the moment he did, he saw Jeremiah. His son's face, his wide, fearful eyes. The small, broken voice calling out, "Daddy?" A lump formed in his throat. This was exactly what he had tried to protect his son from. This world. This system. His father's voice drifted into his mind, as clear as if he were sitting beside him. "They don't care if you're innocent, Malik. They only care that you're black." He had heard that warning all his life, but hearing it and living it were two different things. A door creaked open down the hallway, breaking him from his thoughts. He sat up as footsteps approached. "Carter," the guard grunted. "You got a visitor." Malik's heart leapt. He stood as a familiar figure walked in, Danielle Freeman, the young attorney who had made a name for herself taking on cases like his. She sat down on the other side of the scratched plexiglass and picked up the receiver. "Malik," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I saw the video." Malik gripped the phone tighter. "Then you know this is bull," she cut in, fire in her eyes. "Yeah, I know, and so does everyone else." Malik let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "They're outside," she continued. "Hundreds of them, protesting, chanting your name. This isn't going away quietly." A flicker of hope lit in Malik's chest, but he smothered it before it could grow. "The system don't care about protests," he muttered. "They'll find a way to bury this, just like they always do." Danielle leaned in, her gaze sharp. "Not this time." Malik held her stare, searching for something, assurance maybe. A reason to believe that this wouldn't just be another name on a list. "Officer Thompson's dirty," she said, lowering her voice. "We're gathering evidence. Turns out you're not the first black man he's done this to. But you will. Be the last." Malik clenched his jaw. He should have felt relief, but all he felt was exhaustion. "Your son is safe," she added. "Miss Eleanor's got him. He keeps asking about you." Malik swallowed hard. "Tell him I'm okay." Danielle nodded. "I will, but you need to promise me something." Malik waited. "Don't let them break you," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "That's what they want." The police department released a formal statement, calling the accusations against Thompson misinterpretations and insisting that the force had always upheld justice. But the community knew better. The video of Malik's arrest had already spread beyond their town, beyond the state. It was everywhere. Inside the precinct, tensions simmered. Officers whispered in break rooms. Some shook their heads in silence. Others averted their eyes when Thompson walked by. At first he ignored it. "Let them talk," he muttered under his breath. "It'll blow over." But it didn't. A junior officer, young and hesitant, came forward first. His voice wavered as he recounted the unofficial stops Thompson had made. Then another officer spoke up. Then another. The department tried to suppress the leaks, but it was too late. Investigators uncovered stacks of reports, cases of young black men arrested under Thompson's watch, their charges eerily similar. The same accusations, the same fabricated evidence, patterns no one had bothered to question before. The mayor, once silent, now found himself at the center of a storm. "We will cooperate fully with federal investigators," he announced, his usual bravado replaced by caution. "There is no room for misconduct in our police department." The town watched as the FBI arrived, suits and badges in hand, carrying folders thick with evidence. Still, Thompson held his head high. "They got nothing," he grumbled to a colleague. "Just a bunch of nobodies whining on the internet." Then the recording surfaced. His own voice, clear as day. Had to put that boy in his place. Should have done it sooner. It played on every news station. It played outside City Hall where protesters gathered. It played in homes across the country where parents shook their heads and children asked, "Why?" The mayor had no choice. Effective immediately, Officer Ray Thompson is suspended pending further investigation. For the first time, Thompson felt the ground shift beneath him. Inside the county jail, Malik sat on the edge of his cot, his hands clasped together. The door creaked open, and the guard nodded. Time to go. He barely moved at first. He had imagined this moment, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure how to feel. Stepping outside, the air hit him first. Cool, fresh, real. Then he heard it. Voices, cheers, the roar of a crowd, and then, "Daddy!" Jeremiah broke through the sea of people, his small legs running full speed before crashing into Malik's arms. Malik held him tight, burying his face into the boy's shoulder, feeling the warmth, the reality of him. The world had seen him broken, humiliated, But this moment of holding his son was his victory. Danielle stepped forward, her face triumphant. "The charges have been dropped," she said, her voice steady. "There was never a case to begin with." Malik nodded, swallowing the knot in his throat. "They fired him," she continued. "Suspended for now, but it won't end there. There's a lawsuit waiting for him, and the department. A part of him wanted to feel relief. But another part, the part that had spent his life watching people like Thompson walk away, knew better. What happens next?" Danielle met his gaze, her own resolve unwavering. "We fight." The lawsuit was filed. Within days, Malik's case wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the boys before him, the men who had lost years of their lives to false arrests and planted evidence. The town, once divided, now found itself reckoning with a truth it could no longer ignore. Thompson was charged with misconduct, civil rights violations, perjury. The police chief resigned under mounting pressure. A new leader took his place, one who vowed reform, and Malik rebuilt. With the settlement, he opened his own auto shop. He hired young black men who needed a second chance. He mentored them, taught them more than just cars. He taught them how to fight without raising their fists. At night, he spoke to community leaders. He stood before crowds, telling them what felt like to be swallowed by a system that never meant to let him go. And Jeremiah watched. One evening, as they stood outside their small home, Jeremiah tugged on his father's sleeve. "Daddy," he said, looking up, "can I tell my class about what happened?" Malik bent down, searching his son's face. "What do you want to tell them?" Jeremiah thought for a moment. "That you didn't do anything wrong. That sometimes people get treated bad just because they look different. But it doesn't mean they should stop fighting." Malik felt his chest tighten. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You tell them exactly that," he said. In the heart of town, where an abandoned building once stood, a new community center opened. Malik stood in front of it, looking out at the crowd. It was slow, it was messy, but change was happening. And as he stood there, the weight of the past finally lifting, he knew. This fight wasn't just his. It never had been. The news spread fast. By morning, headlines blasted across every major network. Officer Ray Thompson fired amid corruption. Investigation. His name, once a symbol of unchecked power, was now synonymous with disgrace. Inside the precinct, Thompson paced the empty locker room, his fists clenched. The badge that had once sat proudly on his chest was gone. "They're making me a scapegoat," he muttered under his breath. No one came to his defense. A knock at the door made him turn. 2 federal agents stood in the doorway. "Raymond Thompson," one of them said, flipping open a badge. "You're under arrest for falsifying reports, misconduct, and multiple civil rights violations." Thompson opened his mouth to protest, but the cold steel of handcuffs cut into his wrists before he could speak. The same sensation he had inflicted on countless others. Outside the station, the crowd erupted in cheers. Phones recorded his walk of shame as he was led into the squad car, the same kind he had used to haul innocent men away. For the first time in his life, Ray Thompson knew what it meant to feel powerless. Malik sat in his lawyer's office, staring at the document in front of him. Check. His settlement for the wrongful arrest. "It's a start," Danielle said, watching him. "But we both know this isn't justice. This is just them trying to make it all go away." Malik nodded. "Justice isn't a check." Danielle leaned forward. "Then what do you want to do?" Malik let out a slow breath. "I want to build something." A few months later, the shop opened its doors. The sign above read, "Carter & Sons Auto Repair." Not just a business, but a promise. He hired young men from the neighborhood, kids who had been told their whole lives they wouldn't amount to much. He taught them skills, showed them how to navigate a world that wasn't built for them. One afternoon, Malik wiped his hands on a rag as a familiar voice called out, "Daddy!" Jeremiah ran up to him, his school backpack bouncing on his shoulders. Malik crouched down, ruffling his son's curls. "How was school?" Jeremiah grinned. "We talked about you today." Malik raised a brow. "Oh, yeah?" His son nodded. My teacher asked us to share stories about heroes, so I told them about you. Malik swallowed hard. What did you say? Jeremiah's voice softened. I told them you fought back and you didn't give up. Malik smiled, pulling his son into a hug. Good, he whispered. You keep telling them. In the heart of town, where a once-forgotten building had stood in decay, a new community center now thrived. The grand opening drew crowds from every corner of the city. People who had once walked past each other in silence now stood together, united by a movement greater than any one man. Malik stood before them, looking out at faces filled with hope, faces that had once known only fear. He took the microphone, cleared his throat, and spoke. This town tried to break me, he said. Tried to bury me, but I'm still here. The crowd erupted into applause. We're all still here. He looked over at Jeremiah, who stood beside Danielle, his small hands clapping along with the rest of the crowd. This isn't just my fight, Malik continued. This is all of ours. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with us, with one voice, one stand, one moment of defiance. Silence hung in the air for a beat. Then a single voice called out, We hear you. Then another. We stand with you. Then another. And just like that, the movement grew. Malik smiled, the weight of years lifting off his shoulders. This wasn't just a speech. This was the beginning of something unstoppable.